Point well taken. Thank you. Lisa, would you please introduce yourself and who you represent? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Lisa Stark with Union Pacific Railroad, and really happy to be here today on behalf of the California rail industry, which represents freight railroads in California that travels on over 5,500 miles of railroad track. As you may know, the rail industry has been investing at historic levels to keep pace with freight demand, but also to ensure we have a safe and reliable system to operate on. Each year, the railroads allocate billions of dollars for infrastructure and expansion projects that will enable the industry to serve the growing needs of customers from a broad range and cross-section of the economy. And in 2015 alone, just between Union Pacific Railroad and BNSF Railway, our two companies have a capital private investment plan of over $10 billion to invest back into our infrastructure and upgrade technology, et cetera. However, even with the investment of significant private capital to support goods movement on the freight rail system, there certainly are challenges that exist for our industry today. For example, as freight demand increases over time, freight rail system capacity is very likely to become strained. Capacity constraints and bottlenecks, obviously, as we've heard, create significant inefficiencies in the goods movement system. It also results in increased emissions and raising the overall cost of moving goods for both the public as well as industry. In addition, and I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard us talk about this, but California's regulatory and permitting process is much more challenging, costly, and much lengthier than we see in other states among our networks. So even when the rail industry plans to spend private capital in California, oftentimes it is much more difficult to do so than when we can do the same type of investment and focus on another project in another state where it's easier. In addition, regulatory mandates on industry that seek to require the use of unproven or unavailable technology results in additional cost and project delays for industry. An example of that is the federal mandate for the freight industry as well as passenger to implement what's called positive train control. And Union Pacific to date alone has spent $2 billion to develop that system, test that system, and begin installation of that system here in California and across our 23-state network. But from the rail industry's perspective, future investments in the good movement system that could result in significant public and private investments should include incentive funding to support technology development and testing of that technology to improve efficiencies. We should build upon existing infrastructure to maximize efficiency and throughput with the least cost to the freight system. We must continually study our networks and external markets so that we can identify and remove freight bottlenecks that create inefficiencies in the transportation network, and that's across all modes of transportation, not just the freight industry. Additionally, projects which enhance capacity can promote economic development and improve reliability for the goods that move on our transportation systems. On the regulatory side, CEQA and permit project streamlining will minimize delays and the cost of delivering projects. This will also increase our economic competitiveness and provide environmental benefits for our state. We think that competitive grant programs, which require thorough analysis to identify specific public and private benefits, are really critical for continuing targeted investment in the California's freight system. And public and private partnerships can also be very beneficial. We've had the experience of being involved with some here in California, specifically the Colton Crossing project down in Southern California. So programs like TCF or the Federal Tiger program really have facilitated projects, again, that have both those public and private benefits. And as our freight movement trends change over time, we're really looking at how our investment strategy changes across our system, which really creates competition for every project in all the states where we operate. So state-sponsored programs absolutely help leverage private investments within California that our industry may not otherwise spend or would spend in another state. But in closing, I just leave you with railroads, airports, highways, seaports, and distribution centers are multi-generational investments which are not easily duplicated. They must be protected, and they can be continually utilized well into the future, even as business practices and other things mature and change. Therefore, long-term planning, which analyzes freight demand, will be imperative to prioritizing goods movement-related investments to maximize those public and private investments. The rail industry is engaged with both the California Freight Advisory Committee as well as the Efficiency Strategies Development Group, which are looking specifically at strategies to fund freight infrastructure projects that are critical to goods movement in California. And we're really looking forward to continuing being part of both of those groups and looking at these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions of Lisa? I'll get back to you with the questions. I just want to give Weston a shot at getting forward. Weston, please introduce yourself and who you represent, please.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Weston Labar. I'm the Executive Director of the Harbor Trucking Association. We have roughly a little over 100 member companies operating over 6,000 trucks in the ports of Long Beach, Los Angeles, and Oakland. I really want to thank you, Chairman Frazier, for having this and for the tour that you did of the ports of LA and Long Beach. The stakeholders that attended have been giving nothing but glowing feedback of that, and it's good to know that freight is being considered when we're looking at transportation and transportation funding. As you know, that's not always the case federally when we're looking at how we're going to pay for things. When we look at diesel taxes, but looking at zero emissions technologies, we have some disconnect in how we're funding things, but how we want to progress into the future. And I thought a good way to start, you've heard a lot of numbers from a lot of people, is to walk you what might happen in the day of a truck driver in the ports of LA, Long Beach, or Oakland. Because they start early in the day, and they will drive their truck in traffic to get to the port, where they will line up waiting for a gate to open for maybe an hour or two outside, where they might get into the gate. They could deal with several different factors there depending on what marine terminal they're in. Then they will deal with congestion getting out of the harbor district on their way to whatever warehouse or distribution center that they're going to. And all of this can take a lot of time and a lot of money. We measure turn times, which is the way we calculate them is the amount of time that they enter a geographical location for the queue, which we have geofenced, as well as the time they're inside the terminal and exit. This last month was the first time since August of 2014 that the average across all the ports in LA Long Beach was under 90 minutes. And when the Clean Trucks program went into place, we talked about 60-minute turn times being good turn times. In 2013, when we started the study, we consistently had average turn times across all of the 13 terminals between 60 and 80 minutes. And we haven't seen that now, like I said, since roughly 2013. As we move in the future, we need to take a look at not just the turn times in the ports, but the congestion, obviously, on the freeways, as many of our members in Southern California have operations in the Inland Empire, and getting containers from LA Long Beach to Rancho Cucamonga, Moreno Valley, et cetera, that can take hours. And when you look at things like hours of service and companies that they get productivity, how many containers they can get in and out of the ports is how they get paid. And how we get things from point A to point B really is about how we invest in the infrastructure. If you look at our seaports, we've done an amazing job, the ports of LA, Long Beach, and capital improvement projects on the seaside. The problem is I don't think we've kept up on the land side when it comes to transportation. Last week I was at a meeting in Long Beach where they're actually the planning department is looking to get rid of one of the only two overweight corridors in the jurisdiction, which will create even more congestion and even more issues for industry, and I think as well as environmental issues based on the fact that you're moving people from two corridors now to one corridor. And I know Union Pacific's very involved in that as well because it directly feeds into their ICTF facility. So as we look at things, and you brought this up and you've brought it up several times, it's about the economics of it. If we can have a more efficient system, which technology is going to be a big part of, as well as infrastructure improvements as far as brick and mortars making the roads. If we move the goods faster, there is an incentive for industry to invest in clean technology. However, what we've done in the past is picked winners and losers, and it hasn't always been the best thing for industry. And you've heard it, billions and billions of dollars have been invested by not just trucking, but by trains, by the PMSA and the marine terminals and the shipping lines. And so as we move forward, the way that we need to meet the environmental expectations is by figuring out how to be more efficient across the supply chain. Because if we can create incentives and we have more of a carrots as opposed to a sticks approach, we can incentivize business to invest into themselves as opposed to mandate that they do so. And I think that's the big key, because we've had this discussion before. California has leading and progressive environmental regulations, which are good if we can actually keep companies here to abide by them. And I think that's the biggest threat, is a lot of times to meet our emissions reductions goals, we just move industry someplace else, which means we haven't really created any emissions reductions. We've just moved it someplace else. And so by making an efficient goods movement system here, getting containers from the ports out to wherever their final location is going to be, if we can do that in a cost-effective and efficient manner, we can ensure that we're going to keep business in California for a long time and make sure that they're abiding by some of the most stringent environmental regulations worldwide. And that's the only way we're going to accomplish both things, is incentivizing business through efficiency and by allowing them to be a California corporate partner and abide by California environmental regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Weston from the panel? Just Lisa, you had talked about the firms making an investment based on a willingness of a state to be a partner, or if there are roadblocks, where would you decide to put your capital? Could you expand on that?
Sure. So, I mean, in the rail industry, we're constantly using metrics to evaluate where our business needs are. We're always looking at volumes from last year compared to where we are at this time this year. We're tracking different industries and different market sectors to see what is the supply and demand going to be based on consumer need, et cetera, or industrial needs or chemical needs. So when we're looking at, well, we have 2 projects on the table with a limited amount of funds that we're looking to put into projects, say, in 2015. If we have a project in a state where we can get through, if we're partnering with the state on a project, if we can get through the environmental process in a more timely manner so that it makes more sense for us to make that investment, rather than in California, where if we gauge in that, you can have project delays of several years. By that time, that investment may not necessarily be needed anymore, or we've made that investment in a different project on a different state because of the ability for us to make that investment sooner rather than later.
I think a prime example is Colton Crossing, which is a great investment from a lot of different agencies to make it all work. If each one of the panelists could actually share with us what you would think would facilitate a better process moving forward, and if it was on your bucket list, in a few words, each one of you, tell us how we could actually, as a partnership or in collaboration, how we could work together to improve the movement of goods and services. David, we'll start with you and then we'll work down.
Well, I think that what the Port of Los Angeles seen over the past year with the larger ships and with the congestion that we experienced, again, a lot of that not related strictly to the labor negotiations that took place between ILWU and PMA, that a state partnership in ensuring that we can see some investment in our terminals, both in terms of getting them berth stretch, getting these terminals modernized, electrified to be more productive, but also to lower their emissions. I think a state partnership there would be extremely helpful. What we're seeing now is with the formation of cargo alliances, that the key to success in attracting those lines of service is you want to have the infrastructure, and that just gets you in the game. But you really do benefit a lot from having a very dense trade lane. And if you don't have that basic infrastructure, you risk losing just one line, which could represent a massive amount of cargo. And so just to stay in competition for those now consolidated lines, we need the infrastructure. We need to be able to accommodate the larger ships, handle them efficiently, get them off the terminal property as soon as possible, and make sure that there's adequate investment with all along the domestic freight system, so the highways, the roads, and out to the warehouses, and also the rail lines connecting to the eastern U.S.
Okay, can I cheat? All right. So you asked for one. We already have 2 bills. I included them in my presentation. So, but I think they're emblematic of what we'd like to see, which is more public participation in terms of leveraging our ability to do some financing for projects. But then beyond that, I think the integrated freight planning opportunity we have with the executive order and with where we're going with the state planning process over the next 10, 11 months is we can establish actual metrics for success with respect to economic competitiveness. We don't have that. We don't have an economic competitiveness baseline. We don't have, at the state level, we don't have a good economic impact analysis of what comes out of the industry and how what we do might affect that, both positive and negative. So I think moving forward, everyone up here, we all have the same customers. It's cargo owners. And so regardless of where you're making your investment in the mode, it could be, at the seaport, or it could be for trucking, it could be in the railroad, it could be on the environmental side, it could be, reducing costs, or it could be increasing efficiency. Those are things you can measure cross-mode if you actually have an economic metric and goal. So if there's one thing, in our opinion, that the state can do to assist us in moving forward, it can be to actually evaluate the economic impact of an investment.
Perfect. RJ?
Well, to go off what Mike was saying, we need to have a strategy. I mentioned the bottleneck relief, and if we were to wipe out just that 50 list, the list of 50 in SCAG alone, that's 1 million hours. Those are things that we can measure today. And so if we could agree to a comprehensive strategy to help relieve some of this stuff, that's going to make us more competitive as an industry. It's going to make California more competitive as a whole. It's going to help us leverage federal dollars, hopefully if our congressional partners eventually get their act together on a long-term highway bill. So if we can agree on a strategy moving forward, I think that we can see a number of benefits come out of that.
Lisa?
Yeah, I'll just go back to just one point I made in my comments, is I really think from our industry's perspective, because we invest such a significant amount of money in our system on an annual basis, that really streamlining the environmental and permitting process in the state to get those projects done sooner rather than later is extremely important to our business.
Weston?
I first want to say it's an honor to testify in front of my assemblyman, who I've gotten to testify as a councilman many a time, but this is the first time in Sacramento, so it's good to see him.
It's an honor for me to sit on the floor.
Yeah. But I'm going to swing for the fences a little bit here, and I think CEQA modernization is a big thing that needs to be looked at, because even private industry wants to invest in projects that helps the system. And we've got projects that take 10, 15 years to even get to the point where you might be able to get a shovel in the ground. And at that point in time, as you've heard, it may not be needed. We look at the 710 expansion, for instance, and that's been going on for 10 or 15 years. And nobody wants to downplay the importance of the community or the environmental impacts of the community. But when people are putting bike paths on freight corridors and complaining about emissions, I don't think that really goes hand in hand. And so CEQA is a very important tool, but we need to make sure that it makes sense in moving California forward as far as an economic engine, not just from environmental quality. And so we need to make sure those work in concert.
Weston, I also want to thank you for attending the boat harbor tour with me and the roundtable discussions. A lot of information from all of you when we've been doing our tours, and it's really helped us bring this to a level where we start this process of identifying need and then implementation. We're going to move on now to any other questions from the panel. Mr.
I'll just make a quick comment, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the entire panel for the information you brought here today, and the effort, any effort you can make to spread it across the Capitol can only help our cause. Because a lot of people come up here, and transportation to them is moving people. Well, where I come from, transportation is moving, for the most part, containers out of the port and out of Southern California. And we know that it's not just about moving things and people, it's also about our greater economy as well. And with this comes many challenges, so I thank you for presenting them today.
Mr. Sajan?
Yeah, Mr. Stark, do all the trains run on diesel?
Yes, freight locomotives run on diesel.
And sometimes it's observation, I see them when they come to a stop for whatever reasons, they're idling and left idling for a lengthy period of time. Is that because it's less expensive to do that than to shut off and start?
Yeah, there are We do have idling rules in place in California, and the air boards watch those very carefully. We also have idling reporting lines. Sometimes what happens, and why you might see, I should go back. We also have automatic on and off mechanisms on our train, so that if a train has to sit for some reason and it needs full power for a significant period of time, it can cycle on and off. But the other thing we have is some things that may cause us to have to idle a train are extreme temperature variations. We actually don't see those too much in California, but with the way that I am not a mechanical expert, but I do know that with freight locomotives, if the temperature drops below 40 degrees, because of the way that they're composed, you have to keep them idling, because otherwise you could have a potential catastrophic engine failure on that. But again, the rail industry has done a whole lot to really limit idling and really only utilize it if it's absolutely necessary.
Also, for everybody else, when we speak of transportation or increasing gas tax, it's always roads and more lanes or bridges. For your operation, it's just CEQA? Expedite your needs for CEQA?
Predominantly, when we're trying, and I know part of the rail industry, we have one of our partners, BNSF Railway, for example, that's been trying to get a project permitted in Southern California, a very good environmentally strong project, and I believe they're at least at year 8 in that process, if not more. 15, thank you. You're closer to it than I am. UP is going through a similar process for one of our facilities down there, but it's just, again, the lengthier that process is, you're not getting the benefits of what that would mean to the efficiency of the goods movement system, or air quality, or the economic competitiveness, if we're able to make those investments sooner rather than later.
And are those areas you already have the right-of-ways?
Correct. Some of those areas we need to, in a lot of the projects, a lot of times the railroad already has the right-of-way, or if we do have to acquire more right-of-way, a lot of times that will trigger the environmental review process. Obviously, we like to be a part of that process to the extent that it makes the projects transparent to the communities where we operate, and we do provide mitigation measures for those. But, for example, currently we're looking at, maybe partnering with Caltrans on a couple of projects, and I won't be specific, but when we look at the ability to partner with the state for those projects, we have to make an internal determination whether or not is it worth it to the railroad to partner with the state and trigger that lengthy environmental process, even if it's only on existing railroad property, or do we go ahead and make the investment ourselves and just move forward with it?
Thank you very much. I want to thank the panel for coming up today and your expertise moving forward. Look forward to working with each and every one of you on these. Definitely, we've got to work on the bottlenecks and pinch points, and again, embracing what the ports and the freight industry do for the economy of California. We've got to be able to become a partner and encourage success, along with setting and attaining goals for not only the economy but also for environmental impacts, whatnot. And again, a lot of you have already taken the steps to do so, and I really appreciate that. And anything that we can do as a body, as you said, you've got a couple bills that you're looking at. We need to have your input through this process and be vocal, be very vocal, because we don't want anything force-fed that actually will hurt jobs or people's quality of life. So your expertise is absolutely imperative moving forward. So thank you. So we're going to move on to public comments. Is anybody in the public that would like to address the panel moving forward with any of your visions? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to closing remarks. And before I do, anybody in our panel would like to say anything before closing? Mr. Alejo, would you like to say anything? Mr. Sajian, Mr. O'Donnell? Then I will go into my closing remarks. Thanks so much to all our presenters. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we move forward in this special session. We've got a really big task ahead of us, and I think we're ready. I really want to thank the industry folks for being here today. It's helped a great deal hearing your perspective. I think we're hearing loud and clear that the Proposition 1B model really worked, and that information is really helpful, and anything we can do to get folks to work together and leverage dollars is very important. This is an exciting time. We've got the perfect storm here, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make it work to our advantage. And at this time, I'd really like to thank my panel for being here, also the committee. Thank you for attending. My staff, who's worked very hard to put this together. Manny, Vicki, Janet, and Josh working forward. This is something that really, really, really is going to start a process moving forward for support. So thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned. This hearing.